Good afternoon and welcome to the 2020 Congressional Forum. My name is John Olajide and I'm the founder and CEO of Access and the 2020 DRC Board Chair. Our event this afternoon is presented by Texas Instruments with support from our gold sponsors, Atmos Energy and Lockheed Martin, and our silver sponsor, Fidelity Investment. Thank you so much to our generous sponsors. We're so grateful for all your leadership and support in our community. A primary focus of the DRC's mission is to attract and grow businesses while working to create an equitable environment in areas such as healthcare, education, and workforce development. Following the killing of George Floyd, the DRC board and leadership announced the formation of a new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council at the DRC. This board-led committee, just board members only on this council, will focus on 4 pillars. First one is diversity and leadership. Second one is education and workforce development. Thirdly, community investment in underserved areas. And fourth, policing and criminal justice issues. The DRC is also in the final stages of hiring a senior vice president for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council to ensure these critical issues get attention every single day. And an announcement should be made in mid-September of this new leader that we're adding to the DRC. I am so proud to share with you that no other organization in Dallas has moved as quickly or as decisively to put together a permanent framework in place at both the board level and the day-to-day management level to ensure that these issues are front and center on an ongoing basis. We're excited to host today's virtual gathering of congressional leaders to share their wisdom and insight during such a critical time in our country. The Dallas region is fortunate to have these leaders in Congress who not only have seniority, but have the determination and know-how to get things done for Texas. It's my pleasure today to introduce Steve Bonner, the Vice President and the Head of Global Government Relations at Texas Instruments, our presenting sponsor. Steve, it's my pleasure to turn things over to you at this point.
Thanks so much, John. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with all of you. And thanks to everyone at the Chamber. Texas Instruments is proud to be the presenting sponsor of today's Congressional Forum. For decades, TI has operated with a passion to create a better world by making electronics more affordable through semiconductors. For many years, we've run our business with 3 ambitions in mind. We'll act like owners who own the company for decades. We'll adapt and succeed in a world that's ever changing. And very importantly, we will be a company that we're personally proud to be part of and would want as our neighbor. Today, we're going to hear from 5 members of our North Texas Congressional Delegation who will discuss the federal legislative landscape and how these policies will impact our business community in the year ahead. Let's talk about format for today. Our panel will be moderated by Jason Whiteley from WFAA. Really looking forward to hearing from all of our speakers today. Please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to submit questions during the panel discussion. We'll wrap up the Q&A and we'll be finished by around about 1:15 this afternoon. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel. Let's start with the Dean of the Congressional Delegation, Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson is serving her 14th term representing the 30th Congressional District of Texas. She's the first African-American and first woman to chair the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. She's the highest ranking Texan on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and the first nurse to be elected to the United States Congress. Next, Congressman Colin Allred in his first term serving the 32nd Congressional District of Texas. He serves on 3 congressional committees: Transportation and Infrastructure, Foreign Affairs, and Veteran Affairs. A proud Dallas ISD grad and civil rights attorney, Congressman Allred previously served in the General Counsel's office at the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development before returning to Dallas to represent the very district that he grew up in. Congressman Van Taylor is in his first term representing the 3rd Congressional District of Texas, where he serves on the House Committee on Financial Services. He previously represented District 66 in the Texas House of Representatives and District 8 in the Texas Senate. A 7th-generation Texan and a Harvard grad, Congressman Taylor is a decorated Iraq War veteran serving in the United States Marine Corps. Congressman Mark Vesey was elected to the U.S. Congress representing Texas District 33 in 2012. He currently serves on the Energy and Commerce Committee. A former Texas State House representative, the congressman was born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas. And finally, Congressman Ron Wright, in his first term serving Texas 6th Congressional District. Congressman Wright currently serves on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and the Committee on Education and Labor. Congressman Wright is a 6th-generation resident of Tarrant County. We're so grateful to have all of you with us today. And with that, Jason, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, Steve, thanks so much. And you guys, we unfortunately don't have Congressman Wright with us today. He had to bow out at the last minute. He had something pop up. So we don't have him, but I'm going to go ahead and ask our other congressional representatives to go ahead and turn on their cameras so we can get the conversation started here. Congressman Taylor, Congressman Allred, Congressman Vesey, and Chairwoman Johnson there. Thank you guys so much for being here. We know it's tough because you guys have busy schedules. So let's get right down to it. And to make the most of the time, I'd ask you just, for some brevity, if you can, so we can get thoughts from everybody in there. Everyone's laughing when I ask that question, but anyways, let's start with one of the biggest things out there right now, and that's the negotiations on another round of COVID stimulus relief. They've stalled. There seems to be no agreement in sight. What's it going to take to get this done? To get something finally done here, and for the people who need it. There are a lot of people who need it. And since you're kind of the odd man out here, Congressman Taylor, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Well, it's great to be with everybody here today. I will admit I missed the ballroom where I got to sit on the far right, sort of in the correct place for me. But it's great to be with all of y'all on Zoom. And I appreciate the DRC for putting this together, and thank you, Texas Instruments, for being the sponsor. So, I'm actually part of a bipartisan working group that's trying to create a framework to show that Republicans and Democrats can come to an agreement. I think there is a deal to be had, and more importantly, it needs to happen. We've got a lot of people that are hurting out there, a lot of businesses that need particular attention, and I think that this pandemic unquestionably has moved everybody's cheese, as I like to say. However, some people have had their cheese move further than others. And so you're seeing a lot more pain in some spaces, like say the restaurant space or hospitality, airlines. Some of these things are extremely important to our region. And then in other places, say e-commerce or online billing or telemedicine, right? So I think that we need to begin to think in a targeted way about how we're going to help specific sectors of the economy get through to the other side. And I think a deal needs to be had because our country's hurting, and it's disappointing to me to see people taking this opportunity and kind of putting a partisan wish list of things that they've wanted for years and years, rather than taking this opportunity, which I think was what we did in the first three CARES packages, of coming together on a bipartisan basis, coming to an agreement. And it has some things that one side or the other didn't want per se, but at the end of the day, we got it done and we got it out the door. And I think there's no question that they've made a material difference in how our economy has been able to respond to the challenge of COVID.
Yeah, no question about that. Chairwoman Johnson, indeed, there was bipartisan work on the previous packages. What are you prepared to compromise and not prepared to compromise to get this other stimulus, bill through Congress?
Well, to be honest with you, I have not been a part of the negotiations and don't know all the details. However, I think that the bill that we have been a part of putting together. The part that I put together, of course, had to do with the research to make sure that we are also attacking the virus as we are attacking the results of the virus. And hopefully we can get that passed. The most critical thing, I think, is to help these frontline workers and many of the people who've lost their sources of income during this time. And so it's really very important that we not really compromise on those areas. Hopefully, as we continue to move along in the negotiations, we can come to an agreement. There are some sticky points. One is relieving businesses of all liability, which really denies people a redress to court, which I do not agree with. And I don't know whether I'll have to make a decision to accept that in order to get some of the other things that you want. Always negotiations are give and take. And we try very hard to make sure we never forget who we're trying to serve. And that's the people who are dealing with this deadly virus. And it's critical. We see more and more casualties of this virus on a daily basis. So the longer it takes for us to negotiate it, the more critical it becomes. I'm hoping very soon that we can get back to the table and continue to negotiate until we get an answer, an agreement that will actually serve the people and the people's needs.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Congressman Allred, the Chairwoman brought up liability protection for businesses. That's a big deal that a lot of businesses are concerned about. What are the sticking points, and how do we get over those in your mind?
Well, thank you, Jason. I'm so glad to be here with my colleagues. And I'll say that I share Van's frustration that we have not reached an agreement. I do think that it needs to be pointed out that the House passed legislation several months ago, the HEROES Act, that would extend many of the programs that we're talking about, and that within the negotiations, we've come down over $1 trillion from the HEROES Act to try and meet the administration in the middle, and they haven't come up. And so, I'm somebody who is, pushing our leadership every single day to try and come to an agreement, to find areas that we can agree on, and to not let those areas that we disagree prevent us from doing some really important work. And, for us here in North Texas, one of my biggest priorities throughout this process has been our aviation industry and the extension of the PSP program, the Paycheck Support Program. We have over 100,000 aviation jobs that are going to be lost at the end of this month if we don't extend that program. And anybody who knows about the aviation industry knows that these are jobs that you can't just hire them right back if they've been out for a few months, which we don't even know how long they'll be out, because there are security clearances involved, there are certifications involved that can lapse. And so these are not folks that you can just send out into the unemployment lines and then bring back in as soon as you want to. It'll have an extended impact. And with us having American Airlines and Southwest Airlines here, Love Field and DFW, this would have a disproportionate impact on us. I think along with Atlanta, we're probably the area that would be most impacted if we can't do something to save our aviation industry and to get them through this. Because Van's right, there are areas of the economy that are doing better than others, and there are some that have been hit much harder. And I think one of the sticking points that I know of, and like the chairwoman said, we're not involved in all of the back and forth negotiations, is funding to cover some of the revenue shortfalls for our states and our municipalities. And what we're looking at here in North Texas is enormous shortfalls in our city budgets and at the county level. And the state level is also seeing enormous shortfalls because the revenue is not coming in that was expected. And what does that mean? Well, that means they're going to have to make very, very deep cuts to essential services at a time when we need those essential services. And so that, I think, that's not a partisan wish list thing. That's something that I don't think we should allow our cities and our municipalities and our states to have to make these deep cuts, because that'll also hurt our economy's recovery in the long run. Now, we've already come down quite a bit on the number there that we're hoping for, but I hope that we can reach an agreement, because if not, we're going to see, essential services. I'm talking about fire and police, and of course, education, which is always, as Van knows and Mark and the chairwoman know from their time in the State House, always the big ticket item. those are the things that are going to be cut if we don't find a way to cover some of these shortfalls.
Congressman Vesey, Congressman already just mentioned, Democrats have come down quite a bit. There's still room for negotiation here. What's it going to take to get this over the line?
It'll be interesting to see as we get closer and closer to being back in Washington, D.C., exactly what the speaker has negotiated. I mean, I can tell you personally that we have to have a stimulus payment. I mean, that money not only helps these families, but it helps our local economy. And so we need to make sure that we're keeping money flowing into the economy by helping the American taxpayer out with another stimulus check. We have to continue with unemployment. And I know that that's a sticky topic for some people, but I thought that the Republicans wanted to lower the amount of money that people were getting for their unemployment from $600 to $400. I mean, that makes no sense. I mean, yeah, sure, Dallas, Fort Worth is not San Francisco or New York, and the cost of living here isn't as high in those places, but the cost of living here is going up. Rents here have gone up dramatically over the last several years. I mean, that check, unemployment checks, helps these families, and we absolutely cannot lower the amount of money that they're getting for unemployment. The other, we have to aid for small businesses. I think that we have to continue that, and I want people to really think about that piece. When we start talking about our airlines, when we start talking about our small businesses, these unemployment checks, these stimulus checks, people really need to see it for what it is, and that it helps the economy right now. So when we get on the other side of COVID-19, whether we come up with a vaccine or whether or not we just figure out a way how to live with it through social distancing, masks, and new protocols that are put in place, whenever we get to the other side of this thing, we want to make sure that we have as many businesses that are up and running as possible. The startup time for a new small business to get reopened or to open up so they can start putting dollars in the economy and start contributing to our local growth here, is going to take too long, and we're going to push economic recovery further back if we don't sit down at the table and negotiate some of these things. And in closing, I just want to talk about what Colin mentioned a second ago. It is absolutely 100% wrong. It is terrible what is being done to local cities and municipalities. The money that we passed in CARES Act, that is still sitting in Austin. And these local mayors and these local city councils, they need that money. They've been hit hard by having a decrease in their sales tax revenue. And, for the city of Dallas, which Colin and Eddie and I represent, the city of Fort Worth that I represent, that has 900,000+ people, that was fine. They were over the 500,000 person threshold. But for these other cities in the Metroplex, they need this money, and it's just sitting in Austin. And the governor probably wants to use it to balance the budget, like they did in 2009 when Van and I were in the state legislature. If the governor needs extra help, he needs to ask for it. But these cities need that money. So for me, any future bill that we pass where the cities are not given this money directly is a no-go. The cities need to be given this money directly. And it is, and that provision is something that would help everybody that is on this Zoom today.
Congressman Taylor, I see you watching intently there. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, I just want to say something that has come to me, in negotiating with colleagues from around the country, is just how much worse fiscally other states that were poorly run fiscally are than Texas. Texas received $8 billion in direct CARES funding. I think about $2 billion has already been sent out the door. More is, and it's a, show us your expense and give us the receipt. We'll reimburse you type strategy. And Texas, unfortunately, is in the minority. 15 of the 15 states have sent money out the door. 35 states are actually sitting on the money, which is pretty shocking. So New York State, not a penny's gone out. California, not a penny's gone out. And part of that's just how fiscally well run Texas was prior to this, right? So Texas has got $10 billion in its rainy day fund. The comptroller's recently come out and said, hey, I think we're gonna have a $4 billion shortfall for the biennium. You contrast that with New York State, not to pick on them, but just as a, for example, I mean, they only had about 5 days of cash on hand. They're looking at a $15 billion budget shortfall. And so the fiscal mismanagement really comes to shine in this environment where you see, okay, not only does Texas have the money, but they're able to hand it out. And I think that's a key difference. And I'll, just going locally, here in Collin County, the Collin County government, I think got about $171 million, of which the county used about $3 million. The rest of it's gone to cities across my district, right? I mean, every city's gotten money, and 501c3s have gotten money from Collin County through the CARES dollars that Congress sent. But again, that's a result of good fiscal management for a generation. That wasn't just good decisions that were made within COVID. It was what was done prior to. Other counties, other states were not as well run, and they're really feeling the pain.
I've heard several of you guys mention the travel industry, and obviously we're home to American Airlines and Southwest Airlines. American just a week or two ago said it's going to have to lay off 19,000 employees if it doesn't get another round of federal assistance. Southwest said it has to cut 35,000 flights in October if it doesn't get another round of assistance. Can you guys kind of tell me where we are? And Chairwoman, I want to start with you on this. Is Congress working right now physically on another bill for airlines? Because I know that the president, I think, has tried to do some of this on his own.
Yes, there are efforts to take a look at the airlines. The legislation before us has taken care of the employees, and that has been the focal point because there was no way to predict, frankly, how certain industries would be affected more than others. It clearly became clear that people were going to stop traveling. But the first interest went to the employees and also the support systems around those airlines, the airports. There were a lot of small businesses that was set to go under without traffic. So all of that has been looked at. And one thing I will say, everything we're spending is in deficit. So we try to be pretty good, responsible people in how we spend, because some way we've got to also make sure we generate this same money to keep from being in a permanent deficit. And so what we try to do is look at where we draw the line in terms of who we can look out for. We cannot obviously look out for every part of every business or every societal problem, but we're trying to make sure that people can exist and can make it through it. And of course, my whole focus has been on the people and how they're going to make it. But in addition to that, making sure we focus on how we get control of this virus. It is very clear that we cannot outspend the virus. Right. We're going to have to make sure we focus on that research. We have field testing going on now. We've got to come up with a vaccine. It's been lots of controversy within the administration on whether or not we're generating the confidence in the people to even cooperate with the research to get to the answer to this virus. But we just as important as it is to look out for the business, it's equally more important to look at how we're going to control this virus. We're never going to be able to outspend it. We're going to have to get control of it so that the people can come out of this and businesses can return. The government cannot fund this entire society. We've got to stop the virus.
Chairwoman, thank you. Congressman Allred, you're also on the Transportation Committee there with her, and you mentioned aviation a moment ago. I guess the question that a lot of people have is Congress going to be able to do something by the end of October before these layoffs happen at American and before these 35,000 flights are cut at Southwest?
Yeah, well, the Chairwoman is absolutely right, of course. And I've been saying this for months, that our economic health is tied to our public health, and we are not going to get back on track until we get a hold of this virus. But the airlines have come to us with a $25 billion package to try to get them through this crisis. And it's just an extension of what we did in the CARES Act. I have pushed very hard for that. There's some legislation that being led by the chairman of our committee, Mr. DeFazio from Oregon. I think that has over 290 co-sponsors. And I hope that in this negotiation that money and that legislation will be included in the final package. As the chairwoman has said, we don't know every thing that's being traded, and there's always considerations back and forth. But this is a priority for me, and I know it is for the chairwoman as well, since we're both on the committee. And for all of us here in North Texas, I know it is, because it's an enormous part of our economy. But I actually am optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic because the airline CEOs have been on the Hill. They've been up speaking with the administration. I think they've been very clear about what they will do with the money, how the economic impact in terms of keeping these folks employed will be actually better for the economy than the cost of what we're going to put out, so that we'll get more back in terms of economic output than we would lose. So to the chairwoman's point about the deficits that we're running, we've already seen that there are investments that we make that, even though they have a big ticket number, they bring more back into the economy because we keep that industry going, or we keep that important sector of our economy alive. But again, to the chairwoman's point, ultimately, the best thing we can do for the airlines is to beat the virus. And so we have to make sure we do that. But I hope that before the end of this month, as Mark was saying, when we get this package and we're all seeing that Washington works on deadlines, that this will be part of it. Because I've spoken with the folks from American, they've already told me that those notices they've sent out will be sent to tell people you will be furloughed or let go at the end of the month. They will rescind those as soon as they know that they will get this money. That's how big this is that we get this done.
Yeah, and indeed,
I'd like to make one more comment
Yes,
on
ma'am.
that.
Go ahead.
Even when we get to the point where we have the virus under control, there's no guarantee that we're going to move back to the same way of life at the same intensity. Things will change. People have learned they can work more remotely. They've learned that they can take care of a lot of business without flying. And so all of that, we have to take it as we see it to see how we can address it. But it's clear that we're not going to go back to the same way of life that we were leading before then. I think lots of these adjustments that we've made might become permanent. And so our airlines and all other industries will have to probably work with us to make sure we can come to a decent and effective balance. And that's why that is equally as I'm equally as concerned about the lack of broadband and the lack of Wi-Fi availability to our students, because that's going to be a way of life for the rest of their lives, whether they go back to school full-time or not. So we cannot just focus on where we are and try to restore to where we were. We've got to plan as we move along.
Good point. That's a great point. Congressman VC, you mentioned airlines as well too. I believe your district actually includes the corporate headquarters of Southwest Airlines. How confident are you that Congress is going to be able to get money to our two hometown airlines by the end of the month?
Jason, let me tell you, and I'm going to age myself in this story, and I know that there are people that are on that can talk about even other layoffs that have happened in the Metroplex that have been devastating. But I remember back before Lockheed Martin purchased General Dynamics in Fort Worth, and Fort Worth, about 30,000 people that worked at the General Dynamics plant there. When I was growing up, I had relatives that worked there, friends that worked there, and in one day they had 8,000 people that were laid off. And if you drive White Settlement today, and you drive through Westworth Village today and some parts of Fort Worth today, near and around the plant, you will see businesses that shut down that still never recovered, and their doors have been closed ever since, and there are buildings that are still boarded up. We have about 30,000 people that work in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex at American Airlines and Southwest Airlines, respectively. If we do not help them during this time of COVID, I promise you that that is something that no one here wants to see. It would be devastating economically. And Congresswoman Johnson is right. There are going to be permanent changes to people's travel habits and what have you because of COVID-19 and some of the technology that we're employing right now. But again, when we finally get to the other side of this, we want to be as in strong of a position as possible. And the people have to remember, these jobs pay well. These jobs, I would imagine that the average person out at American Airlines and Southwest, they're probably pulling in anywhere between $70,000 and $80,000 a year. And so you want to talk about a devastating impact to small businesses. One of the things as members of Congress that we have to deal with is that, one of the most regrettable things that I think that has happened in American politics was in 1994 when Newt Gingrich and the Republicans took over the House. Everything became nationalized. Before, politics used to be very local, and you would see people say, well, I can't vote for that bill, even though I'm a Democrat and this is a Democratic bill. I can't vote for it because this is going to be bad for jobs back home. And you would see Republicans do the same thing. But now every topic that we deal with has become so nationalized, including whether or not we're going to help industries like airlines during this time in the pandemic. And it shouldn't be that way. Because again, if these businesses have to lay off that many people, it's going to be devastating. And the people that are going to end up taking it on the chin the worst are going to be the small business owners here in Dallas, Fort Worth, because that is how powerful that dollar is that comes out of that Southwest employee's pocket and that American Airlines pocket as they spread it out throughout the Metroplex. These small businesses, and none of us want to see massive layoffs at two of those largest employers in the Metroplex.
Congressman Taylor, I want to shift gears just a tad here. We've talked a lot about another round of stimulus for individuals, for businesses as well too. But government funding is something that hasn't made a lot of headlines lately, and I'm curious what you think about this, because it looks like that government funding and another round of stimulus might all be wrapped in a big single package. And you guys return to DC, I think next week. There are a dozen days or so that you guys will be able to examine this, debate this, negotiate this. The clock is ticking on you. So given past negotiations, I'm curious, how likely are we to see a deal physically get done before a potential government shutdown might happen?
Well, people tend to do their homework, tend to hand their homework in when it's due, and Washington is no different. I've seen a lot of rabbits pulled out of the hat at the last minute in Washington, and so I know the Senate. I understand their skinny bill, their version of a package is coming out next week when they're coming in town. For whatever reason, our district work period got extended another week, even though there's a economic meltdown and a pandemic, but I guess we don't need to be back there to do anything, which I'm not sure I completely agree with. I think there's a lot of work we need to do. And this is probably first and foremost. I hope that we can put something together in time. And again, I think there is a framework that has a whole bunch of these different discussions, whether it's improving the Main Street lending program. That's a program that just has not really worked. Maybe a renew on the PPP. I think we've got to think about sector specific help. Some kind of unemployment shift. I know the president's done that by executive order. Maybe trying to memorialize that and something that's is more bipartisan. So I think there's a lot of things. Liability protection. So it's a pretty long list. Just going over a framework is probably a 20-minute description. We're hitting like little bits of the highlights, but it's a big one. I mean, this whatever package does come through, if one does come through, it'll be a big one. In dollars and in complexity. On topics, right? I mean, it's just the whole thing. It's just big.
And you're known for reading every word of them, I understand, right?
I try to read as much as I can. I know that's unusual in my profession.
That's good, though. Congressman Allred, you mentioned a moment ago you're cautiously optimistic about an airline bill. How optimistic are you about avoiding a government shutdown?
Yeah, we won't have a shutdown. I don't think there's any scenario where that's going to happen. We'll have a continuing resolution, which I know is Van's favorite mechanism for keeping the government open. He and I both agree that we should probably pass a budget at some point, but we're going to do that. That'll roll us over until the end of the year, and then next year we'll readdress this. And I'm So I see no scenario in which there's a government shutdown. I've been surprised before, Jason. So we'll see. But to your point about the airline, just really quickly, I'll just say to everyone who's watching this, the House is in favor of this funding. We need to make sure our senators are as well, and the administration is to get this agreement. So to any of you who have the ability to or the willingness to, please reach out to our senators. Use your voice with them and with the administration, because as Mark said, this is something that we can't allow to happen. And I'm cautiously optimistic again that it's not going to, but I want to make sure that we see that across the line.
Chairwoman Johnson, I want to shift gears again and talk about the FAST Act, the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. This would provide, reauthorizing it would provide much needed funding for highways, for motor vehicle safety, and for public transportation. Can you give us an update? Where are we on this right now?
Well, we're actually waiting for the Senate to determine where we are in negotiations. It's a massive bill and had great input from all segments of the committee and people outside the committee. And of course, before we started and before the pandemic, we were quite aware of the great need we had. That has not been diminished because of the pandemic. So we did put together a very complete bill trying to address various issues that affect us here in this region very personally. As a matter of fact, I worked very hard to look out for Texas and this region. Whether or not we're going to be able to negotiate it, how well we'll be able to negotiate it in the Senate is yet to be determined. But we feel that we've justified those needs. We feel it'll also generate income. Transportation for every $1 billion that we have really creates 40,000 to 50,000 jobs. And so in addition to the infrastructure needs that we have, it really is a job creator. So we're hoping that we can negotiate that through the Senate.
Congressman Vesey, what do you think about that? Because it does generate a lot of jobs. It's a complex bill, a lot of money involved, and obviously people need jobs right now, especially right here in Texas. Again, I kind of asked before, anything that you would not take from the Senate when they give you their take on it?
Well, to me, I see it as another great piece of legislation that's sitting over there in the Republican-controlled Senate that Mitch McConnell should have acted on a long time ago. Look, we need to do this. The president, at the very beginning of his administration in 2017, he talked about the importance of an infrastructure bill and why we needed to get one done, and indicated that he would work with Democrats and Republicans, but we needed to pass one, and we did our part in the House, and we need for the other side to catch up with us and get something passed. Look, you think about it right now. Americans need work, and you can do infrastructure, particularly because a lot of infrastructure obviously is going to at least start outdoors, and people will be able to socially distance safely, wear masks. The industry that works on a lot of these projects that is in this bill, they have great protocols that are put in place to deal with it already, and they're ready to get to work. And we ought to help them by getting this bill to the president's desk and signed ASAP. Van has some roots there in Midland, Texas. Right now, hydrocarbons, a lot of the components that are needed in order to do many of these infrastructure programs are at all-time lows, and so that would actually help us deliver a lot of these projects as cheaply as we're ever going to be able to. We ought to get this passed, and the president, instead of fanning the flames of riots and commenting on Antifa and all the other things that he likes to talk about, he needs to be talking about infrastructure and getting that and putting it on the forefront of the American public, and not all these other things that he's spent so much of his time talking about.
Guys, we have about 3 or 4 minutes before we're going to break here for just a moment. But I want to ask all of you to kind of go down, give me a 30 or 40-second answer here. Obviously, we touched on this earlier, and that's the position of Texas and how it's in a better position than a lot of states to potentially recover economically a lot quicker. But what needs to be done at the congressional level to make sure Texas actually does recover quicker than other states? And again, we have 3 or 4 minutes here, so I'm going to ask each of you to give 30 or 40 seconds if you can. Congressman Taylor, I'll start with you, sir.
Well, I'll just say again, my bipartisan negotiations on the CARES 4 package, it's really stark how much better off Texas is, and particularly North Texas is, than other parts of the country. We're at 8% unemployment. That is a very real problem, but it really pales in comparison to New York State being at 16%, and actually New York City's at 20% unemployment. I mean, there are some parts of this country where the virus and the shutdowns have just been absolutely devastating to their economies. I feel very optimistic about North Texas's future, and I'll particularly add, I hear more and more from businesses around the country that say, I'm leaving this blue state. I can't take it anymore. The taxes were too high. It's fiscally insolvent. It's poorly run. The shutdown is the final nail in the coffin. And I'll just everybody here, brace yourselves. The next decade is going to be a lot of companies coming from around the country to come to Texas because of the way that we've conducted ourselves during this pandemic, but actually the way we conducted ourselves for the last couple of decades in terms of being a successful state.
That was about 45 seconds there. Congressman Allred, same question for you. What can Congress do to help Texas position itself to recover economically? As short as you can here, sir.
Yeah, well, obviously the airline industry is one of my top focuses, but I'll talk about education, which is that we can't allow the already enormous gaps and inequity in our education system to be deepened by this crisis. And the chairwoman mentioned access to high-speed internet. We know that over a third of kids in Dallas don't have high-speed internet, and so they're sitting at McDonald's parking lots trying to get access to the internet so they can do their homework. We can't have this period deepen those inequalities. So at the federal level, we're going to have to provide that funding to get through our school districts and through the state to make sure that we don't see a reduction in funding, but also to try and cover some of these gaps that we know exist and that are going to make it harder and going to widen our inequity in our education system. If we don't do that, for all of what Van's talking about in terms of people coming here, then we're not going to have the workforce here locally to fill those jobs. And workforce development has really got to be a big focus for us. We got to make sure that this pandemic doesn't set us back in that regard.
Congressman Vesey, we have about 90 seconds left. I want to split that between you and the chairwoman. I'll let you go next, sir.
Yeah, no, absolutely. To just piggyback on what Colin just said, education. I have a ninth grader, and I'm worried. I mean, right, Fort Worth ISD has done a great job of making sure that everyone has a hotspot and a Chromebook, but you still worry about what they may be missing by not having in person. And I'm concerned. We need to make sure that they're getting the quality education that they need, and we have to keep money flowing in the economy. Again, I've mentioned the stimulus checks. I've mentioned unemployment insurance and help to our businesses, because we need as many small businesses afloat once we get on the other side of this in order to make sure that things can stay going economically the way that Van was just talking about.
Chairwoman, final word on this topic.
Well, thank you very much. And I appreciate what we've done in Texas and where we are. However, we are part of the United States. If we don't help the rest of the country, then we will fall as well. When all this unemployment comes up in other states, they will move to the states where it's not so much. And so we cannot be a monolithic approach to how we deal with this pandemic and the economy for this nation. We've got to be inclusive. That's why we're looking out for industries, and that's why we're doing a large transportation bill. It's inclusive. We are a part of the United States. I'm proud to where we are. There are criticisms sometimes of how we got there, but I'm proud of where we are, and I'm proud of being a part of a can-do community. But we've got to understand that it's everyone's responsibility.
Right.
I will work to make sure that all of us are informed in our region on where we're trying to go. The impact that will have will depend on the listener. If we can get this entire delegation together, we will impact the rest of the Congress.
No question about that. Quick message to our audience. If you have questions for our panelists here, you can enter those in your chat feature there, and we'll ask as many of those as possible in the next few minutes here. But as those are coming in, I'd like to introduce our gold sponsor here, Lockheed Martin, and Zach Sherman is on the call with us here. He's the Director of Government Affairs at Lockheed Martin's Missile and Fire Control Systems. He has a few words before we take our questions for our congressional delegation. Zach, go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much, Jason. Yes, we are very proud to be the gold sponsor for today's event. Lockheed Martin is a longtime sponsor of the Dallas Regional Chamber's Congressional Forum, and we're so very proud to partner on so many of these discussions and debates that bring the key leaders together to understand the true needs of our business community, especially during this time and uncertain environment we are facing. Thank you so much to the Dallas Regional Chamber, our wonderful, distinguished panelists, and the leadership that you all have provided, and our colleagues on the phone. With more than 80 years in Texas, Lockheed Martin has been a pioneer in the field of versatile, high-performance defense technology and an important contributor to the nation's space efforts. Today, Lockheed Martin Texas operations supports 34,000 direct and indirect jobs, as well as retirees within the state. Those employees work at 4 main business areas: Missiles Fire Control in Grand Prairie, Aeronautics in Fort Worth, LM Space, and Rotary and Mission Systems across more than 25 locations in the state of Texas. The Missiles Fire Control line of business has 3,500 employees in the area and has enjoyed some recent successes in 2020, in which those programs provide research and development and bringing highly skilled labor and advanced technology to the Dallas and Grand Prairie communities. In addition, so far in 2020, our regional employee base has contributed $1.64 million to the North Texas community, and while logging over 95,000 volunteer hours to better the community we live in. Lockheed Martin has also donated $1.6 million to various STEM and military veteran organizations in the area. Before I turn it to Jason, I would just like to remind you once again to submit any questions you have in the chat function below. And Jason, back to you. Thanks a lot.
All right, Zach, thanks. Already have quite a few questions in here. We're going to start with these as our panelists turn their cameras back on here. I'm just going to start from the top here and go down the list. And I'll ask this one just broadly, whoever wants to answer it. What is the status of the 501c6 inclusion in the Paycheck Protection Program? Can anyone offer an answer on that one? Does anyone want to offer it? Go ahead, Van.
Sure. Yeah, no, we there's a separate bill for that. C6s are chambers of commerce, and so that's something that we'd like to see. Just a little history: the PPP eligibility, they actually took the SBA eligibility language, stuck that in the bill. Someone very intelligent said, "Hey, we should include 501c3s," and then they didn't keep going down the line. So C6s were missed. I certainly would like to see that changed. I know I've signed on to that legislation. And I do not know if that's not a top line discussion, but that's where that.
Gotcha. Thanks for the update on that. FEMA has recently issued directives that all PPE will not be considered a reimbursable expense in this pandemic as it is now. In FEMA's opinion, it's considered an operating expense. Do you agree with this change in policy by FEMA? Congressman Allred?
No, I don't. And I've had a lot of disagreements with FEMA lately, particularly given that they didn't choose to reimburse us here in Dallas after the tornado that we suffered. And they used what I thought were some really strange accounting games to get around having us meet the threshold for the amount of damage required when we clearly have more than that damage. And, you know, it's something that I'm very frustrated with. So no, I don't agree with that. Listen, our budget's already stretched very thin from all the things we've discussed on this call. FEMA needs to be supporting our communities as they're going through these things, not adding to their costs. I understand there's probably some rationale that has been issued, but on the surface of it, I don't agree with that.
If anyone else wants to jump in on any of these questions, feel free to. I might just call on some of you if you don't know the answer, like the first one there may be. Feel free to yield the floor to anyone who might. I want to ask another question here. The U.S. has committed more than $10 billion to develop a vaccine, all public money, obviously. Do you know when this money will be allocated? I understand that as of today, it still hasn't been distributed. And then a thanks to all of you representing us in D.C. That's from that questioner there.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Congressman.
I'll take that. Yeah. So Operation Warp Speed, I think that Chairwoman Johnson was alluding to it earlier. So that the administration, I mean, to their credit, they came up with a completely new plan. You know, that has never been tried before in the history of man. They said, hey, we're not only going to do one vaccine or two or three or four, we're going to do 5 separate vaccines, and we're going to manufacture hundreds of millions of doses of all 5 vaccines simultaneously while we're actually going through FDA testing. I think yesterday it was announced the 4th vaccine is going into stage 3 testing. Remember, phase 1 and 2A are your safety testing phases, and then 2B and phase 3 are your efficacy testing phases. So you've got 5 vaccines that are safe, and you're just trying to figure out if they're effective. And we're manufacturing hundreds, over 1 billion doses of all 5 vaccines. So it's an incredible endeavor. Congress appropriated the $10 billion. I think in CARES 2. Right. And so that money is being spent. The vaccine is being developed. And again, unprecedented, never been done before. I know we're in a tough situation, but I think as Americans, we should be really proud of and that was, look, bipartisan. Everybody here voted for that, right? We all, hey, we need to spend this money. We need to get a vaccine. We need to, this is ambitious and aggressive, but it's what I think, difficult times call for bold actions. And I'm proud of everybody here for taking those bold actions.
And
Jason, I think the key is,
yeah,
if you don't mind, I think the key also, we're having trouble passing these bills, like right now with HEROES, making sure that we're appropriating enough money, spending enough money for instance, like PPE, and making sure that we're supporting our medical community. I mean, we have to remember that even if we were to have a vaccine today, how many people live in America? Let's say 380 million people live in America. I don't think that anybody thinks that we're going to vaccinate 1 million people a day. So it's going to, in order for us to make sure that we're laying the foundation and the infrastructure to be able to get a vaccine out once we have one, we have to be making these critical investments. And right now, because of the obstruction of the Senate, we're having a hard time getting some of these bills passed out in a timely manner. And so we have to make sure that we're doing everything to support our local medical community with PPE and the other equipment that they need, making sure that we have the syringes, making sure that all of the apparatus is in place to be able to deliver a vaccine to the American public in a timely manner. And I don't think that we're there yet.
And to get back to the heart of the question, though, I thought that money had already been allocated to these pharmaceutical companies. Is it a pay on delivery thing where that's when they get the cash?
No, the money's going downrange. We're spending the money. We're buying it. We're negotiating
right now.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Chairwoman Johnson and Congressman Allred, I want to ask you, since you're members of the Transportation Committee, both sides agree on the need for an infrastructure bill. They cannot agree on how it's funded. Where is the common ground on funding to get a package passed? That's the next question. Chairwoman Johnson, I'll let you go first, please.
I wish I knew. If I knew the answer to that, we would not be in a stalemate. When you start out with hardly any funding, it's difficult for 500 people to come together to determine how we fund without funding. We still have not worked through all of that. I think it's possible to do so when we start listening and talking to each other, which I've not seen very much of, which is unfortunate. It's just like, and I want to comment just briefly on the efficacy of this testing. If the people have no confidence, if it's so much change and so much getting away from making sure that it's a proven, legitimate test, then we're not generating the confidence for people to take the vaccinations.
Yeah.
That's an important facet of all of this. We cannot get away from sound science and research and think that people are going to trust it.
Congressman Allred, same question to you too. Is there common ground to be found on an infrastructure bill? Seems like both sides want it, but we're just not there yet.
Well, I don't know. I'm not going to disagree with the chairwoman because she knows better than I do in terms of how long we've been going back and forth on this. But I know that here in Texas, for example, we've agreed to tax ourselves for our infrastructure in the last election. And that when you tell the American people, I think, that there's going to be a certain amount of cost that's going to go into this direct benefit to your community, to your state, to your area, I think people are supportive of that. So I think we need to be honest about that. Infrastructure is different really than any other type of government spending. It does have a very direct economic impact and has a long-term impact. And we are still living off of the Eisenhower era infrastructure in this country. We have not addressed the gas tax since the early 90s. And things are changing, and we don't have the revenue sources to keep up. And so, yes, we now have a lot of different funding mechanisms that we've used in North Texas to fund the roads that you see around you. That's why we have so many toll roads, so many access roads that you have the option. But that has a limited shelf life in terms of how much you can do with it. There has to be additional federal investment. And to do that, we're going to have both the revenue and I think present the plan to the American people of what we're going to do with that revenue, that it's not just going to come in and you're not going to know what happened to it, but that you're going to see real benefits in your community, because the experts have told us that we need $3 trillion worth of investment in our infrastructure to get us up to speed. We're not going to do that all in one bite, but that's a lot. And we literally do have bridges that are falling down. We have areas that are inaccessible that shouldn't be. We're slowing our economy with this. And here in North Texas, with all this growth that we're facing, we're going to have to deal with this growth, not just in the roads that you see, but also the electrical grid that you don't see, the water systems that you don't see. The chairwoman has done so much for us with the Trinity and the water systems. But these things require investment over time, and high-speed internet is another one. I'll just really quickly on the vaccine, I'll just say that I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I was very disappointed to see the administration say that they are not going to join in the WHO's distribution of the vaccine around the world, because listen, if this virus exists anywhere in the world, it's going to come back to the United States. So this is not just an American problem. This is a global problem. This is a problem for our species. And if we don't beat this around the world, it'll keep coming back here. And so I think we need to be a part of that. We should be leading. We should be leading the WHO, not ceding it over to China or to someone else. You don't pull out of these things just because you don't like how they're functioning. You take a bigger role. And the WHO relies on us and always has, and we shouldn't be withdrawing from our leadership role around the world.
We've had two questions here for Congressman Taylor asking about the HOPE Act. Can you update the probability of the HOPE Act being passed, and when do you think it will be activated and available to hotel borrowers in need in the CMBS world? And for those who aren't familiar with the HOPE Act, if you can just do a quick refresher and then answer that question too, please.
So the Helping Open Properties Endeavor, or HOPE Act of 2020, we have seen the problem when your revenues drop down very dramatically and you've got a mortgage to pay. It's hard to do that. And so Congress took immediate action. We told all the banks, hey, you need to start forbearing on your mortgages. That was about $15 trillion of bank assets in the United States. We told Fannie and Freddie with home mortgages, I think we're almost at 10% of home mortgages in the United States are under some kind of forbearance. They're about $8 trillion of home mortgages in the United States. What we didn't do is we haven't really addressed the commercial real estate market. And so we're watching some very dramatic delinquency numbers in the hotel space, especially in the hotel space, hotels, outdoor malls, student housing. And it's really quite frightening. In Chicago, it's 54% of the hotel mortgages are in delinquency. In Houston, it's actually 66%. So we're watching some very, very serious numbers, and they're getting worse all the time. They're still headed in a bad direction. The Helping Open Properties Endeavor of 2020 is designed to give borrowers the loan that they need to pay their mortgages for basically a year, and then they can pay it back over a 10-year period. There is a version of that bill that is being introduced over on the Senate side. I think we may well see it next week in the Senate version. And it's just, you're trying to stop, and this will mean something to everybody in this room, the RTC days in Dallas, where you watch so many properties get foreclosed and how devastating that was to various aspects of our economy, from happening on a national level. And that is about to happen on a national level, particularly in hospitality, if we don't act. So if Congress doesn't act, you're going to see just an absolute avalanche of foreclosures, the likes of which we really have never seen before. So still working on it and getting a lot of bipartisan support across the board.
Yeah, it's a bipartisan issue. Obviously, any update on timeline on this? 60 days, 30 days? I mean, a lot of people are out there are holding bills, knowing what to do.
You know, I'm continuing to hustle on this and get more people on board and getting a good response. And we're actually starting in the places like Chicago and Houston where they're having really serious problems. Minneapolis, I think 54% of their retail is in delinquency. So you're seeing real hot spots around the country. We're very fortunate here in DFW. It's only at 19%. Understand that's just like off the charts. That's the worst it's ever been. You know, it's just, I mean, that's really bad, but like there are other places where it's kind of beyond belief. I mean, literally beyond belief.
Quick comment from the North Texas Food Bank and Workforce Solutions. They say thank you and your offices for your bipartisan support for our organization. So they are sending out their thanks to you as well too. We have a question for Congressman Vesey. I very much appreciate Representative Vesey's reference and plea to change the narrative at the top of the executive branch from one of divide and fear to one of inclusion and unity. Beyond voting, though, what are other ways that the Dallas region can help you change this current state of affairs beyond voting?
Beyond voting, I think that anything that we can do to, just help make people understand that we need to have a more inclusive environment, that we should stop rewarding people for being divisive. We're always going to have our differences in politics and what have you, but at the end of the day, we all believe that America is a wonderful place, and we all seek and admire leaders that want to bring us together. And we should be instilling that in our children. We should be making sure that that's being taught in our schools, and that we are all practicing it each and every day. And so I don't know if there's anything that government can necessarily do about that, but I think that there should definitely be an expectation from each and every one of us that any leader that we have, particularly the leader of the free world, that person is someone that wants to try and bring us together.
Another question for the panel here too. It says the new deadline for responding to the 2020 census is September the 30th, the end of this month. Texas is already lagging behind the country in our self-response rate. It's important here to reiterate to our audience why it is so important to respond to the census here in Texas. So we'll start here with Congresswoman Johnson and just go all the way down here and just give them your plea on why you want these businesses to urge their employees to get out and physically check the boxes that have shown up in their mailbox.
Well, first of all, to have an accurate count is good for all of us. We can then plan more accurately so that we don't overspend or underspend, whether it's classrooms, whether it's immunizations, whether it's healthcare, and where the locations of dispensing of healthcare should be. How many books do we need? How many classrooms, and where do we need them? Where do we put transportation arteries? Where people live and where they work. And so everything we plan depends on that census, and that plan is for a 10-year period. For every undercount we have, the state loses about $1,200 a person per year for 10 years. So it's critically important. So I hope every employer makes sure that their employees are counted at every level. Now, most of the undercount comes from low income that don't trust the government. Be sure to try to instill enough confidence for them to understand that it's not law enforcement, it's not immigration, it is people, their ages. We need to know how many people are going to be retiring. How many jobs are we going to have for the next generation coming along? And so it's important we plan with all of this, and programs are funded accordingly. Jobs come to certain areas accordingly. That's why it's important to have an accurate count of every person. Parkland Hospital needs to know how many children are born and need immunization, will need health care. We'll know how many community health centers we need. We need to know how many people are getting to retirement age. How many congregate meal sites do we need? We also need to know where students are so we can make sure that those supplies are there. Wi-Fi, broadband. where they live, where they have to travel to school. And so classrooms, you'll see at the beginning of almost every school year in this area that classrooms are available in one area and not available in other areas because the census has not indicated the need for classrooms in a certain area. That's why it's so important for planning, sensible planning, to not only save money, but to plan so that we'll have a balanced way of knowing what we're doing. It is extraordinarily important.
Congressman Vesey, you're already getting phone calls and texts there, man. You want to go next?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry about that.
It's all right.
And let me just address the elephant in the room on the census. And that's the partisanship. We need more time. I don't know why they moved the deadline up, especially under COVID. It makes no sense. But wanting to have an undercount for an electoral gain, I think is just absolutely short-sighted and would be so devastating to our state. I like what Van talked about earlier about how so many companies are moving here. And even during this time of economic slowdown under COVID, you're going to continue to see people look to make North Texas home for their various businesses, and they're going to bring people with them for a variety of different reasons. And we need the money that the census would give us, because obviously the federal government needs to be able to formulate how much money we're going to get as individual states based on census numbers. And public health crisis, education, we talked about infrastructure. All those things are tied to having an accurate count. If we just have a 1% undercount, this state is going to lose over $100 million. We have a 1% undercount. We can't afford that. And look, I talked about the elephant in the room. Everybody knows what happened last redistricting because of the robust growth that we had. 91% of the growth that we had was basically Hispanic and African American in this state. And so Republicans had to figure out how they were going to draw this map with these new census numbers. And they split Travis County up into 5 different pieces. People in Austin don't even know who their member of Congress is. We have one seat that stretches all the way from Fort Worth all the way down to Austin. I mean, it's just a little narrow congressional district. And they had to do that to try to maximize their numbers just so they wouldn't give Democrats 4 seats. And you can't do that. You can't toy with the census like that. It would be a shame if Ohio, a state that has seen devastating job loss, and I pray for our folks in Ohio that have been hit hard over the years because of factory shutdowns and what have you. But it would be a shame if a state like that were to retain a congressional district or get extra money for infrastructure and things in lieu of us, because we didn't get an accurate count here in Dallas-Fort Worth. And so we need to move the deadline back to the end of October to give the census more time to get the most accurate count possible, not just for here, but for the entire country. No one should be shortchanged.
Congressman Taylor, any chance of that? You're shaking your head. And what would you tell businesses who could play a role in this?
Sure. Actually, I've been advocating in my partisan group to extend it, just like Mark's saying. I think we do need more time. I am glad. I know the state of Montana is estimating that for every undercount, the total federal funding loss is about $20,000 per person missed over the decade. And so Texas last time was probably under about $1 million. So that costs us about $20 billion in federal funding over the course of the decade. I think a couple of weeks ago we were actually behind 1.5 million, right? So that's a $30 billion hit that we're taking. We have caught up. I want to just say, hey, Collin County, good job. They actually were at 71.5% self-response rate, whereas Dallas County is only at 61%. So it's really important to self-respond. And I just want to say, if you haven't taken the census, you can go online and you can type in your address and fill it out. And I highly encourage you to do that.
If you can go online.
If you can go online, yes.
Cannot go online.
Sure. And I want to say that I'm very proud that the governor has stepped up. He's actually doing a request for proposal right now. I think it's due today. They're planning to spend $15 million to increase our census numbers, and so census is important. It matters, and it is constitutionally enumerated for all of us constitutionalists out there. The Constitution says we have to do it, so go fill out the founding.
I mean, listen, my colleagues have covered this extremely well. The cost of not having an accurate count for any state in the country, Texas should be the one most interested in having an accurate count because of the diversity of our population, because of the size of our growth, because of the needs that we have. We need that money. And I'm glad that the governor is doing something. And previously, the state of Texas had appropriated $0 for the census, which was a mistake. And because this shouldn't be a partisan issue. It's not a partisan issue. These folks are going to be here. They're going to be going to these schools. They're going to be going to Parkland. They're going to be driving on these roads. And so we might as well get our share of the federal money to make sure that we can take care of them. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And, Mark was talking about the elephant in the room. Well, we also have to stop having any element of trying to make people afraid of the census. And all of this discussion earlier about citizenship questions and trying to make it into something where people be afraid to respond is only going to hurt Texas more than any other state. And so here in Texas, we got to push back on that and make sure people understand, as the chairwoman said, this is not a law enforcement action. This is not an immigration-related action. This is the constitutionally mandated, to Van's point, count of everyone, every person, including folks who may have different statuses. And so we got to have them counted too, because we're going to be providing that fund, those social services that are going to be available here. So everybody's covered it well. The timing is not good. We have to push this back. Just so y'all know, the mechanism they're going to use is this kind of sampling that they use to try and predict if they don't get a full count, to predict who is in an area. We usually only use sampling for 1%, and we're talking about a much higher percentage in this census of them trying to use sampling to determine how many people are in that area. It's much less accurate. And for Texas, it's particularly difficult because we're very hard to predict. And so if we have a large amount of our funding determined by sampling, it will have a massive undercount. And to Van's point, Mark's point, to the chairwoman's point, it's just going to cost us a lot of money that's going to be drawn then from local coffers and come out of your property taxes. So let's all understand that it's just going to come back home to us. So we might as well get that federal funding.
We don't want any more property taxes. All right, Congressman Allred, we appreciate it. Chairwoman Johnson, Congressman Vesey, Congressman Taylor, thanks for the time today. We appreciate your optimism and your bipartisanship there in DC on our behalf.
Jason?
So thank you guys. Yes, sir.
One more thing. All 501c are included in HEROES. Your first question. All 501cs are included in HEROES. Just wanted to make sure that people know that, because this is obviously a chamber event. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. Thanks for that update as well, too. Thank you guys so much. I want to turn it over now to Oric Walker. He's the Vice President of Public Affairs at Atmos Energy. Oric, all yours now.
So what a terrific conversation today. On behalf of the Dallas Regional Chamber, thank you, Chairwoman Johnson, Congressman Allred, Congressman Vesey, and Congressman Taylor. And thank you to Jason Whiteley of WFAA for moderating. Atmos Energy is committed to supporting business-friendly policies that allow our regional companies to thrive. We are pleased to partner with the DRC to foster timely discussions like today's that impact businesses and our quality of life in the region. Community engagement is really an essential element of Atmos Energy's culture. And our employees take pride in fueling safe and thriving communities every day. Being at our best, our team partners with countless schools, hospitals, nonprofit organizations throughout the region to fill lunch bags for children, to provide meals for healthcare heroes and first responders, or by donating much needed PPE. Atmos Energy is also rooted in the belief that safety is at the center of everything that we do. And as we continue to provide essential services to ensure the safety and functionality of our critical infrastructure, we greatly appreciate the support of the DRC in seeking to implement policies that align with our vision to be the safest provider of natural gas services. Thank you again for joining us. And with that, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.